There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Welcome to the Your Mountain podcast. I'm sitting here with Mike McGrady, Nephi Cole. Say hi.
I'm still here.
Yeah. I was supposed.
You're supposed
hi.
to say hi. Yeah, you're supposed
okay.
to say hi too. And we're pretty excited. We've got a great guest today. We brought in Braden Sheppard with the Utah Governor's Office is with us. Braden, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I'm excited about this because we bill our show as talking about your land and your water and your wildlife and all the decisions that are being made that affect your land, your water, and your wildlife. And by having Braden here, I can guarantee you we're going to talk about all three of those today. We're going to talk about Utah's land, Utah's water, and Utah's wildlife. So
we've got plenty of it, so we're excited.
Utah's a pretty amazing place. Almost as amazing as Wyoming. And I'm excited to talk about it. Utah's got how much public land does Utah have?
Over 60% of Utah is federal land.
Federal land, and then so when I say public, I want to make sure we distinguish between federal land and state-owned land, right? Because you might classify it differently. Yeah.
So 60% of the state is either BLM, Forest Service land, a little bit of some wildlife refuges that are owned by and managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service, and then we have some defense land as well, which I guess that's not really public, but we count it as part of that. You
also have some national parks. 5 of them.
Yeah. The big 5. We're pretty proud of them.
And some national monuments that maybe you're not as proud of.
We're working on that.
We'll get to that in a minute. Tell me a little bit about your background. I know you work for the Utah governor.
Yeah, I work for it's called the Utah's Public Land Policy Coordinating Office, and it's within the governor's office. And the role of, and a lot of times people call that the office PLPCO. And the role of PLPCO is to coordinate.
No,
go ahead.
People really call it that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're known throughout the state as PLPCO.
Oh, well, throughout the state. Okay.
And actually, federal government, I've gotten calls from people in D.C., hey, I need to talk to your boss with PLPCO. It's
okay.
It's our acronym, so
we'll give you that one.
So it's so PLPCO. So I work for the Public Lands Policy Coordinating Office, and our whole role is to coordinate comments and efforts to preserve and defend the public's access, rights of access using and being on public lands in Utah. So we work a lot between our state agencies and the federal BLM and Forest Service most of the time. We do work a little bit with the Park Service as well.
How long have you been in that role?
I've been with PLPCO almost 3 years now. And before that, I worked in Nebraska as an attorney. I worked as the chief general counsel for the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. I did that for a little over 2.5 years. And before that, of course, went to law school, did some time in private practice. And my undergrad degree was in wildlife biology. So I went to Brigham Young University, go Cougars. And once again,
this is going to be a tough room.
Yeah, tough room. I got a bunch of Wyoming fans in here, so we had some good runs back in the '90s with Wyoming. We won't go there either.
I just wasn't planning on bringing up that at all because we weren't. Well, I just don't want to go there.
Yeah,
we weren't as successful as we'd often hoped we would be
There's
against
a lot of
BYU.
Pain, a lot of therapy.
There were some challenging moments.
We always looked forward to those home games against Wyoming. They were pretty fun.
I bet you did.
Yeah.
So, I got my degree from BYU, wildlife conservation, wildlife and wildlands. And so I focused on wildlife, but I also spent time doing range management, forest management. It's kind of a broad degree. Spent a lot of time in my undergrad doing bighorn sheep research. So I spent almost 3 years up on the mountain watching sheep. That was my job. I got to watch bighorn sheep, take records of bighorn sheep, and pick up bighorn sheep poop. That's the big joke now in my office. Is my job I was a poop picker upper. It's out there, guys.
It's sort of interesting to me. You're one of the only people I've met that has a similar career path as mine. Because I had a wildlife management degree as well, and I then did law school, and we've done a lot of similar work. Right.
We have.
The thing that's fascinating to me is I think if I had worked on bighorn sheep, I'd still be working on bighorn sheep.
Yeah. What did you work on, Dave?
Prairie dogs.
I'm sorry, man.
I spent several summers working on prairie dogs and their associated species.
Did you pick up their poop?
No, because I would have gotten
just found
plague.
But you didn't have to look for it. It was there.
It was everywhere, yeah. And I always tell people when they say, well, how'd you go to law school? I said, well, I often thought maybe I'd continue being a wildlife biologist if my first assignment hadn't been working with prairie dogs. Yet here you are, having worked with a species that anybody that goes through wildlife biology program would jump at the chance to work on. And you decided not to go down that road. You went down the law and policy route.
It was a tough decision. Back when I was at BYU doing the bighorn sheep research, I loved it. I was in heaven. Every 3 days a week, I was out on the Stansbury Mountain Range looking at big rams. We had an 11-year-old ram that was just huge, big old ram, and loved watching them, loved learning about them. I also saw mule deer every day, big bucks, elk, just awesome job.
Now you hunt, right?
I'm a hunter.
You ever draw a sheep tag?
I did not. No, I've never had any luck, which was frustrating, being out there and seeing these huge rams and being like, I can't hunt them. So if the Division of Wildlife's listening, I'd like you guys to give out more tags in the future for guys like me.
Well, you should be pretty careful there because I'm sure there's a lot of members of the public out there that already assume that you get some favorable treatment in the draw.
There's no favorable treatment for state employees. Let's put it out there for sure, for the record. No, it was a great job, dream job. In fact, I worked with a guy named Daniel Olson. He works with the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources now. I worked with Justin Shannon, who's the wildlife chief now for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources. Both great guys, and we had a lot of fun together. I got married, and my wife and I started talking about our future together. And I was, part of it was financial, to be honest. I looked at the money that I was going to be making as a wildlife biologist. Loved the job. Career satisfaction, 10, super high. But as we sat down, and we kind of thought, is this something that we can support our family on? And a lot of people do, and they make sacrifices because they love the job that much. And I looked at it and thought, I think I can do more than just the biological side. I was really interested in the politics, the policy, how rules and regulations can influence decisions, and how politics can influence wildlife management as well. And so as I looked more and more into that, I thought, I'm going to go to law school and get a degree and kind of specialize in natural resource law, and then come back and hopefully be able to influence policy. And that's what I've been doing. We'll see how it works out.
I'd say so far it's worked out okay.
We're doing all right. Yeah.
And full disclosure, Braden and I met. We met. I don't know.
What,
4 or 5 years ago, something like that. When you were, I think right when you started with Nebraska's department there.
Yeah.
And tried to get you to relocate to Wyoming. Really
David, he had me. There was some good opportunities here in Wyoming, and David talked with me, and I was pretty convinced that Wyoming was the place to settle, and my wife was not. So we came out here one spring, very cold, windy spring day here in Cheyenne, and that was enough for my wife to say no.
So there are 2 votes in your marriage, and she has both of them?
She has both of them. She definitely has both of them.
The hunting is much better here than the shopping is. Let's just put it that way.
So before we really get into any kind of substance, I want to make sure. I mean, you work for Utah's governor, and I want to make sure that what you're saying here today is it. Are you here on behalf of the governor? Are you speaking on behalf of the governor? Are you speaking on behalf of yourself?
No, today, just to clarify, I'm here on behalf of Braden Sheppard. So these are Braden Sheppard's thoughts and ideas, and nothing I say today represents the official stance of Governor Herbert, and I also will just say the Attorney General of Utah as well.
Okay, and you did work for the Attorney General of Utah for a while.
I did, yeah. In fact, when I came to Utah, I came to work for the Attorney General's office doing endangered species litigation, and kind of transitioned over into more of a policy advisor.
Well, thanks for coming in tonight. It's really cool that you take the time to come sit with this group. We're a bunch of policy wonks, and it's really neat to have the opportunity to kick the ideas around with you.
It's good to be here. It was a beautiful drive, by the way. I have to say, we saw probably, I don't know, I'm guessing 1,000 pronghorn. There's just so many pronghorn here in Wyoming. So we might have to talk about during the podcast how to get a Wyoming pronghorn tag.
That's pretty easy. We'll talk about a Utah.
Well, some quid pro
We can make a deal.
quid pro quo here. We'll figure something out, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So we have you here. You're from Utah. There's been a lot of discussion in the national media on public lands and Utah in particular, and I think we'd be a little bit remiss if we didn't just right out of the gates. Let's talk Bears Ears.
Let's talk Bears Ears.
Yeah. So give me a little background. I mean, how did Bears Ears come into being in the first place?
Well, Bears Ears is a super unique place, both geologically speaking. It's unique. It's unique from the wildlife perspective. It's one of our best wildlife units for deer, elk. There's a bighorn sheep down there. We have great predator hunting. So it really is just an awesome place from the wildlife and the geological aspect.
And where is it? Relative to Utah?
Southeast corner of the state. So as you're looking at Utah, southeast corner of the state, there's towns Monticello and Blanding. There's a giant Native American reservation nearby as well. Just a really unique part of the state, and near the Four Corners region. The other thing that makes this place so unique is the amount of artifacts. It was just historically the Native Americans used this area. They were down there for thousands of years, and so you can hike any canyon, and you can see all kinds of artifacts. You can see ancient dwellings. You can see ancient pottery, all kinds of stuff. Just a neat place, and because of this unique nature, and like I said, the landscape is awesome. You go down there, and it's like nothing you've ever seen. I'm definitely selling this for the Utah Office of Tourism. It is an awesome place. You go down there, and you go, wow, this is unique. And for years, there's been talk of what do we do to conserve this landscape. There's also been talk of what do we do to preserve it, to just set it aside and just let it be. And long-standing debate. We're not going to go into all the history here, but there's been a debate.
Describe long-standing.
Long-standing, it goes back 40, 50 years. It's been kind of
this isn't a recent issue. This isn't something that's just coming out of thin air here.
No, you read explorer journals, you read journals from the pioneers, they all recognize that there was definitely some unique landscape down here. This was a pretty cool place. And because of that, and the debate's just kind of gotten more and more diverse, more and more divisive maybe at times as well. We've had a lot of, what do we do with this land? Do we create a national park, another park that's just down there? Southern Utah, there's already 5 parks in that region. There's been talk of, do we create just one giant park between all of these 5 national parks? Or do we, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, you use a term, you said conserve and preserve. And I was wondering, so if you would mind kind of just tackling that straight off the front. That seems to be kind of play into it, like conserve versus preserve. What's your, where do you guys come up with that?
So there's this debate. There's folks that say we want to preserve things. We want to leave it as the status quo, untouched by man. 100%, the best we can, just leave it untouched, leave it alone. And which is kind of my personal opinion is it's tough to preserve nature. Nature's always changing. As a biologist, there's always change happening in nature.
Well, didn't you already say anyway that it's been touched by man for thousands of years? Because you have all these artifacts and Native American history there. You have cliff dwellings, right? It's been touched by man.
Yeah, man's been down there. They've hunted down there. They've farmed down there. Even in our more recent history in the 1800s, I have pioneers, family, ancestors that they went through the famous Hole in the Rock Trail. They went down there and developed a fort and started farming that area as well. And so it's definitely been used by man. People, there's roads throughout the Bears Ears. There's definitely been vehicle access in many parts of what is now known as the Bears Ears Monument. But so it's been an area that's been used, and I use the word preserve because it's tough to preserve something that's already been massively I don't want to say the
not developed,
but
it's been used. It's been utilized by hunters. It's been utilized by mountain bikers, by off-road vehicle users, by agriculture industry. Is there any mining of any kind down there?
There's been some mining historically.
Oil and gas, I know there's some uranium down there.
Yeah.
So it's when you think about it in the context of BLM land, it's a true multiple use landscape.
It is,
right? But you wouldn't go so far as to say you can have multiple use landscape, but not go so far as to say that this is an industrialized area by any means.
Definitely not.
It has intrinsic you use the word wilderness sometimes, and it's mischaracterized because you think of designated wilderness areas, right? But it has some inherent
there's a certain
wilderness. There's a
to
wildness
it.
to it, right? You go there. It's vast expanses of public land and no people and lots of wildlife, and it's what people envision the West always was.
Well, sure, everything's relative, right? You compare that to a city. There's a big difference.
Yeah.
And so any city dweller is going to think of it as wilderness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there has been, over the period of time, a lot of people that have used the area. And so it's not pristine.
Exactly. It's not pristine. It's been touched by man, for sure. Now, when I use the word conservation, that term, I'm thinking more of BLM, multiple use, and sustained yield. These are lands that we want to have what Gifford Pinchot termed wise use. We want to use it, but we also want to set aside enough resources for the future generations to have as well. And so, managed wise use. Yeah, there's going to be some development, some roads, but we're not going to put a city on top of the Bears' Ears.
Wasn't Gifford Pinchot's mantra really, when you really dive into it, it was really maximizing the economic benefit of a landscape, and in order to maximize it, you had to ensure that it was going to continue to be there for future generations, right?
Yeah.
You couldn't
Definitely
overutilize.
Would be the sustained yield.
That would be kind
that's
of the sustained yield.
Yeah, that's the sustained yield
that's
side.
the Gifford Pinchot model, really.
It is.
Yeah,
he definitely wanted to have long-term economic benefits off the landscape, and so he realized to have that, you need to use the land wisely. And I think in Utah, we subscribe to that. We definitely believe that we want to use the land today, but we want to make sure that it'll continue to be available for use, whether that's for hunting, fishing, economic development.
It's more of a blend of Gifford Pinchot's mantra and John Muir's mantra, right? I mean, you kind of put those in the blender together and you come out with modern day conservation.
Why don't you explain that, what those two individuals' general philosophies were, for those who don't know?
Yeah, so I think I just mentioned Gifford Pinchot's philosophy, but John Muir's philosophy was really more of this preservation, right, rather than conservation. Preservation. Let's leave it alone. Let's recognize the intrinsic values and protect these places from almost any use. And so it's finding that balance between any use and all use. And blending those together to recognize that there are places where you might not want to have any kind of use that would have a noticeable impact on the landscape versus where you might be able to have some complementary uses of the
philosophical differences between Big W wilderness, national park type areas, and then BLM land where there's grazing, there's oil and gas development, there's public recreation, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And that's been a long-standing debate. I think that's part of what's the divide today. It's that same debate that goes back to John Muir and Gifford Pinchot. It's the same philosophies. However, because of social media, because of the it's so easy to communicate nowadays that anybody can put their opinions out there, and so we get all these different opinions on what the best use of the land is, or non-use, and it's just creating a divide that's getting interesting.
So fast forward a little bit. You said this dialogue goes on it started 40, 50 years ago, but let's hit the fast forward button and let's go to the last 5 years. Let's give a snapshot of the last 5 years.
No, there's definitely been some push by different groups to create either one was called the Greater Canyonlands National Park. This push to create a great giant national park that connects the Bears' Ears down to Canyonlands, down to Zion National Park, just a giant big preserve. And in that same time period, Congressman Bishop had a public lands initiative, and as part of that, he identified ways that we can create some good management areas within the Bears' Ears. And so Congress was debating this and just was slowly moving. It wasn't getting the traction that maybe Washington, D.C. was hoping for, that the Obama administration was hoping for. And late December 2015, President Obama issued a proclamation that created a 1.3 million acre national monument. And a lot of Utahns said this was foul. And the Public Land Initiative was still moving on. There was still public debate as to what was the best way to use.
You guys felt surprised by that action?
Oh yeah, we were definitely surprised.
There wasn't any public public meeting or working with local communities on identifying whether this was the right approach? I mean, did any of that happen from the administration?
There was some efforts. Sally Jewell came down, and they had a massively well organized debate. There was some local folks there, but there's also a lot of non-locals who showed up from different organizations.
Step back for a second and explain who Sally Jewell was.
Sally Jewell was the Secretary of Interior under President Obama, and so she came down, and we had I forget how many thousand. I think it was a couple thousand people showed up down in Bluff, Utah, to a public meeting, and we're able to give both sides of this is good or this is bad. And so you had this listening session of let's have a monument or let's not do the monument. And with that, Utahns were our administration, our governor's office. We were still communicating with the Obama administration about what to do with this land. And then in December, we get a call from the Salt Lake Tribune actually saying, any comments on the new monument? And this is in the afternoon, the day the monument was created. And so suddenly we're going, wait, that happened? We didn't have any notice that it was going to happen.
So I guess I have two questions. First of all, how many listening sessions were there? You talk about one with several thousand people in attendance, but it seems like it'd be very difficult to get all of the opinions conveyed in that type of a setting. So first of all, how many listening sessions were there? I think I have more than two questions.
I don't know the exact number, David. It's been a little while since I've gone back on the amount, how many. I think, if I remember right, there was a time for public written comment. Actually, you know what? I don't think there was, if I recall. No.
Did they ever engage any local working groups? Have any kind of dialogue? Convening stakeholder groups.
Yeah, but let's be clear, because he was describing a process that was ongoing. Your public lands initiative.
Yeah, that was my next question.
But yeah. You're asking questions, just to be clear, about the administration.
That's
what
right.
it was doing.
I'm asking about the Obama administration, asking what they were doing. So did the Obama administration have a number of these listening sessions? And actually, did they go beyond listening sessions to where they were actual working groups with interested stakeholders at the table providing constructive feedback and ideas?
It was pretty, from Utah's standpoint, from my understanding at least, was it that there was some limited involvement from the state of Utah. The state as a whole, the elected representatives were not involved heavily in the decision. And that was part of the frustration, was that we weren't at the table. There might have been some local tribal groups that were involved. There was some other stakeholders from outside of Utah that were involved in this and kind of drawing the boundaries and determining what to do. But the governor's office through PLPCO had very little involvement. Once the Public Lands Initiative was kind of ongoing, we kind of put all of our eggs in that basket and said, we're going to move forward with this process. We kind of we really didn't think that the monument was going to happen. I think just politically there was an election year going on. We kind of thought with the election year, who knows what's going to happen. And so that was a surprise. Yeah, we were not involved in the city of Utah. Now, there were some stakeholder groups that did meet with Sally Jewell. There were some locals that met. But there was also a lot of non-locals and non-Utahns that were really heavily involved in the decision. And there was a lot of money put out there to lobby the administration.
Just from a devil's advocate standpoint, right? A lot of non-locals, you say, non-Utah groups involved. Wouldn't their argument be, we were talking about not necessarily Utah's land, but the country's land, and therefore their land, and so it wasn't just Utahns that had a vested interest or a stake in the conversation or the decision?
No, I think I've heard that a lot from people that, hey, this is all of our public lands, and I agree it is. It's all of our lands. But when you look at FLPMA gives a lot of deference to local governments and to the states and to tribes, and it kind of gives deference to those three groups separate from the public.
What's FLPMA?
FLPMA is the Federal Land Policy Management Act. It's late, guys, so hopefully I got that right. But so in that law, it's a law that was passed in 1976 by Congress to manage BLM lands. It was kind of like, here's how we're going to manage BLM lands. And within that, state government, local governments, and tribal governments are given massive deference because the way that public land is managed will impact these local economies and the state economies so drastically. And so, yeah, there's a public comment period in any federal decision, but we also need to give deference to governors, to to local elected leaders.
That's one of the things that I would say, Bill Clinton, there's a Executive Order 13132. From the Clinton administration, Bill Clinton was a governor, and I think he understood that. And it is something I think that I'm disappointed that doesn't get more traction no matter what administration, Democratic or Republican, is the idea that federal entities should be coordinating with state governments, that they are, there's a shared, with that federalism, there's a shared responsibility for management, and I don't think there's enough effort put into that.
Can you tell me what this executive order is? I'm assuming it's a coordination type of order, but
so it's Executive Order 13132. Just basically, says that whenever the federal government is considering some process that they're going to go through that's going to affect states in some way, they have to consult with the states. And so when they say and specifically governors, it's mentioned in there, and I know that there are a lot of governors who feel like they don't hear from federal authorities before they make a decision. Like a lot of these decisions are made prior to consultation. So, for example, governors, if you're considering a large federal decision that's going to impact state rights, the appropriate time to bring in state decision makers isn't after you've already decided what you're going to do, and it is not to treat state executive authorities as if they are members of the general public. They're responsible. They're partners in how you're going to implement these regulations. And so that's something that if we could rewrite how you would do things the best way for everybody involved, I think that it would be to reinforce that idea that the best management is done by the people who understand the problems, who are on the ground living with those problems. And so I know that's trite, and maybe some people say overly simple to say, if it's in somebody's backyard, give them a place in that discussion and honor that voice. But really, that's the best way to solve problems, is to let people who know how to solve those problems, because they live with them, work on those problems.
And so now, because it sounds like you didn't have that,
we feel like we didn't get a seat at the table.
Right. Yeah. So now you've got, in your eyes, a pretty big problem. Right. Or maybe you don't anymore, because I want to fast forward a little bit. Right. So first of all, I'll ask you just point blank, and you can deflect this any way you want. Did you think it was a legacy act, a legacy designation for the Obama administration?
Personally, I do. When you look at all the monuments that came out in that short period, I think it was a legacy, especially given the election results. I think it was.
Okay. And so then we had the election results.
Donald Trump was elected president. People were going, what in the world? This is not what we expected.
Right. But from the state of Utah's standpoint, you looked at a changing landscape and thought maybe there's an opportunity to have the dialogue that never occurred. Is that kind of what you're trying to do? Have the dialogue that never occurred before this designation?
Yeah, that was a big part of it. Was county commissioners, elected representatives, and the public at large started really talking to the Secretary of Interior, writing letters, just saying, look, we were not consulted here. These boundaries were just thrown at us. That they were, at one point the discussion was 1.9 million acres. So we were like, whoa, at least 1.3 is not 1.9, but it's still a huge area of southeastern Utah. And so, yeah, when President Trump was elected and he started getting people in place to move the public land work forward, there was some discussion as to, okay, let's go back and say we're not happy with this decision, and let them put this out to the public again to get some feedback as to what should happen.
And so that occurred, right? And you went out to the public. The administration went out to the public, got feedback. Bears Ears now has what's the acreage? It was shrunk significantly. And maybe you don't know the acreage, but it was shrunk significantly. And I understand now there's litigation involving it, and so forth.
You got to understand.
But I did want to touch really quickly, and then I want to move on to a couple other topics that we wanted to get to today. But I wanted to talk about what the Bears Ears designation in the first place did not do. Right? And I want to make sure it's clear. It did not prevent hunting. It did not prevent grazing. And I just want to make sure that that's out there. That a lot of the activities that were allowed to continue, or that were taking place prior to the designation, were allowed to continue after the designation. But still, there were concerns, and so I just want to get to the root cause of the concern from Utah's perspective.
Well, it's fair to say that when the Trump administration went and took a look at this again and said, hey, we think it was, they wanted to change the designation, right? A lot of the public concern about that. I mean, it's fair to say, looking at it from the general public standpoint, or not the general public, but from some of the advocates of bears ears, that you can understand where their concerns may come from. If you didn't understand the history of that, if I'm looking at this from the outside and I see a national monument, I'm excited about that because I love to hike, I love to camp, I love public lands, and suddenly somebody's telling me, hey, you had a national monument, but not anymore. Is that? I mean, that's a valid, without knowing that that full background, that's a valid concern.
Oh, I think from the public perception side, Dave, you're right. There was not a ton of changes with the monument designation because they put this monument, the Obama administration, when they first designated Bears Ears, they placed it into the National Landscape Conservation System, which is a group of national monuments that are managed by the BLM. And so they're supposed to allow for access. They're supposed to allow for camping. They're supposed to allow for grazing, multiple use in general. There's a few things that are withdrawn, like mining and certain development. But to your point, Nephi, it looks bad. Some people get really upset. I've had people go, they took this away from us. We had a monument, and now it's these smaller monument units. They're gone, and so folks go, wow, like this just hurts me. And I've lost 85% of the land that I had as a monument, and I have to tell people it's still public land. It's still federally owned.
Because the Antiquities Act, under the law, the president cannot designate private land as a national monument. You can only designate publicly held land. So the Antiquities Act wouldn't allow this conversion of private to public, and then all of a sudden it goes back to being private, right?
Exactly.
It was always public land. It was then designated as a national monument, still public land with all the same access, and then shrunk in size, but it just went back, still same land management agency managing the land before the designation, after the designation, and after the re-designation. Same land management agency each time.
At the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned the distinction between federal public lands and state public lands and such, and so what you're saying is that it at all times was in federal public land management, and it just got a different designation, a different layer.
Also under federal public land management.
Also under federal, and so
by the same agency,
right? And it went back to what it was before.
Yeah. And so people come to us and say, "Well, Utah, nothing's changing. It's still BLM land. It was a monument, but it's still managed by the BLM. Nothing changed." And one of our biggest concerns, and I think it's going to be an ongoing concern, is there's two real big concerns. One is, how do you actively manage monument lands? There's definitely a different mission. Is it really multiple use, or does it restrict what we can do with those lands? The second issue, which is one that we've really harped on, is law enforcement and this impact on local communities. And these places have already started to become loved to death. You go to Blanding, Utah, or Monticello, Utah, it's tough to get a reservation for a hotel now. Which, hey, that's good for the economy. That's good for economic development. But when you go to these ancient sites that have been left alone, they're up in steep wilderness canyons, and actually this is wilderness with a big W. There's some it's called the Dark Canyon Wilderness Area. And some of these places we're starting to see people rock climb down into. We're starting to see people explore these sites that have really been untouched for the most part by modern man in a long time. And so that concerns us, the fact that there's no one down there to monitor. There's not a budget right now to monitor how many people and where they're going and what they're doing.
Well, and it's this idea of I think you're hitting on it, and it's something I want to transition into a little bit to get into another topic. But it's this idea of, like you said, using a place to death. So Bears Ears that was largely unknown and used by locals, right? Now it gets this national profile and designation, and floods of people come in, but with no infrastructure in place to support the floods of people. Do you have adequate, just basics? Do you have adequate restroom facilities? Do you have campgrounds so people aren't dispersed camping and building fire rings and causing problems? Are you bringing in new non-motorized and motorized recreational users that are causing additional disturbance to this landscape? It's a problem. And I'll use Moab as an example, right? I mean, Moab
largely undiscovered 30, 40 years ago, even 20 years ago when we were in college. Used to go climb there all the time, and nobody really knew about it.
What's Moab today? And it's beautiful. I don't want to give any illusions here that Moab isn't a beautiful place.
It's an amazing place.
Yeah.
Amazing place, but as far as the public lands around Moab, super crowded. You can't go. You can get up at 5 a.m. and say, I'm going to get away from people today and have this place to myself. You get up at 5 a.m. and you go to a trailhead. There's 6, 7 other vehicles already parked. People are already ahead of you hiking in, and you just cannot get away from people anymore. And maybe that's a good thing. I'm not here to say that's good or bad, but there's definitely signs of people there. And if our mission for Moab was to preserve the land for future generations, are we doing that? Are we doing enough? Or is it okay to love it to death? That's a debate we can keep having.
Well, that's another question. I mean, does Moab become the place that you just sacrifice? Say, we are going to love this place to death, but we're going to protect these other places, and we're going to do it quietly so nobody goes and disturbs those places, right?
And I think it's a hard concept for anybody that isn't from that area to understand how 6 cars at the trailhead is a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because from a lot of folks are from areas where 6 cars at the trailhead would be amazing because there's not a lot of people there, right? That it's a very distinct difference in the mindset of many folks.
Yeah, when you're coming from a huge
areas.
urban, when you're coming from even the Front Range, Colorado, you go someplace where you see half as many people as you'd see there, you feel suddenly secluded.
Yeah.
But
I had a friend in school that was out fishing in an area, and it freaked him out that it was so quiet. He was petrified because there weren't other people around. So
I had that experience once. I took not me being petrified. Let me be clear. I took a friend out from Indianapolis, on a fishing trip, and we were on trail, and they were slightly uncomfortable. And I said, well, to really get to where we need to go, we need to bushwhack it here, about a mile and a half, just through the timber. And we got off trail no more than a couple hundred yards. And it was a couple that I was with, and they just flat stopped. They said, "We're done. We can't go any farther. We can't do it. We got to go back." They were just so stressed out about the solitude and I think being off trail made them so nervous.
Well,
it's a thing. It's a thing.
Well, I went to school in my college. I went in Utah, and I can tell you, I love living in Wyoming. I've lived here my entire professional career. It's an entirely different ball game hunting up one of my favorite places, Logan Canyon, when I was in college, and hunting here. I mean, in Wyoming, I don't see orange anywhere. In Utah, if you've got eyes, you're going to see some.
I think you've referred to it as the Orange Ocean.
The Orange Ocean
in Utah.
You just got to hike more, No, and actually,
I don't know. I've heard. Digress really quick. I've heard story. We have a mutual friend that I think went on a hunt with you in Utah a couple of years ago, and it sounds like you put a lot of miles on it. This was I think a mule deer hunt, right?
Mule deer hunt, yeah.
A lot of miles. So you know what I'm talking about. You can't even pretend to not know what I'm talking about. And you spent several days, lots of miles, and I don't recall seeing any pictures of any mule deer being taken on that trip.
Let's just say there was plenty of opportunities. The shooting just didn't quite connect.
I think that almost brings us full circle, when we talk about, the importance of a place like Bears Ears and the challenges. And it's unfortunate to me that we spent so much time as an outdoors community, frankly, fighting over it. Because I think no matter which side of this argument, I think it's fair to say, we're trying to address it objectively, but we can put that problem, we can either put it in the middle of a table in between all of us, we can fight over it, which is what has happened in this case. Or we can sit on the same side of the table and say we have something special. What's the best way for us to work towards it, preserve it, hold it, carry it forward? And it's really unfortunate, but that is, the politics of today, quite frankly, is it's, pragmatism is not in style.
It's all or nothing for both sides. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
win-lose. If I can't win, I want you to lose.
Yeah. That's what you face in just
that doesn't make sense at all, guys. Sorry.
I understand.
You guys got what I meant, though. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. If I can't win, I still want you to lose.
Yeah. There we go. Yeah, there we go.
How about that? We'll add still.
No, and going back to the Moab example, though, you get that even 6 cars might be solitude to many, but by 10 o'clock, you get there at 10 o'clock, you can't park.
No, it's 50, it's 100. I mean,
there's no way to access it. And you're like, well, honey, we just came out here for a vacation with our kids, but let's go back, I guess, and have a big brunch.
But will people do that? I mean, if they are coming from the big city and they see that there's nowhere to park, are they actually going to, stop where they're at and then just not park in that area, or are they just going to find a new place to park?
They've been doing that. They've been expanding, looking for new areas, but we're getting to the point. I want to use the biological term, carrying capacity. It almost feels like some of our parks in Utah and other places are at our carrying capacity. We just can't seem to. We've got so many people coming, we can't handle them all.
Advertising is too good.
They're too good. Yeah, we're doing such a good job that we just can't keep people away. I was down there's a park called Capitol Reef National Park, and it was a more lesser known park in Utah. And it is. I'd say it's probably till now. I just put it out there. No, it's definitely known.
Both of our listeners are going to be there next week.
Now you go down there. Just the last couple of years, because the governor's office has been advertising this place, people come down to Torrey, Utah, small town, and there's nowhere to stay. And so then, they're starting to camp, and it's great to see people out trying to use our public lands that weren't being used. But the folks in Capitol Reef, the people that manage it, they're definitely looking at it going, in the next 10 years, we need more infrastructure, we need more development, we need more places for people to stay.
Are you seeing the same? So we're talking this of folks from not just Utah, but all over the country pouring in.
The world.
All over the world. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about, are you seeing similar problems from a hunting and fishing standpoint in Utah? Not necessarily from outside of the world, but your population is exploding right now in Utah. I mean, it's one of the fastest growing states in the country population-wise, right? Are you seeing an effect or an impact on availability of opportunity for, in particular, hunting, but even angling, because of that growth?
We're lucky in Utah because of the public lands that we still have places to go. But like Nephi mentioned, even back when he was in college, there's some places like Logan Canyon, Provo Canyon, up above the Wasatch Front, where there's just a lot of people above Salt Lake, east of Salt Lake. And as far as access goes, one of our issues has been with more development. There used to be trailheads that you could access from Salt Lake City, and I could go from Salt Lake City, hike for 20 minutes, and be in prime deer and elk country with my bow. Today, I have to be a little more creative on how to get there. There's been private property that's been sold. There's been some exchanges. It's limiting how you access the land. The land's still there. It's still accessible. It's just getting there might be tougher. And the other issue we're having with the massive growth is trying to balance, once again, do we have bike trails? Do we put a new bike trail through a prime hunting area, prime, calving area for elk? Do we put it, or do we just leave that alone as wilderness or untouched by man?
So I think that's fascinating. You talk about having an outdoor recreation economy, and we're going through it in Wyoming too. We want to have an outdoor recreation economy, but if you build more mountain bike trails, that might negatively impact somebody's hunting experience.
Yeah, or a ski lift.
Yeah.
There was a big debate in above Salt Lake City years ago about a ski lift going in just over the top. There's a ski resort called Brighton, and people wanted to put a lift between Brighton over the top of the mountain into a resort called the Canyons and Park City Resort. And big debate. A lot of people wanted it. A lot of recreationists saying this is great. Then you have the other side, some hunters and some people that just wanted to enjoy the natural area that said, "No, wait a second. This isn't good." There was definitely a compromise. People sat down, ended up with a conservation easement through that area that kind of leaves that area alone. It's a prime elk hunting spot above Salt Lake.
So when you're talking, you talked about yourself being able to have access and getting access being difficult, a little more difficult for some of these places you like to hunt and fish, for example. Mm-hmm. How do you define access? How do you define access, and then how do you think the public defines access?
For me, access is getting me to the point I want to end up at. And so it's either a road, a trail. For me, I get to public lands using usually a motor vehicle to get to a trailhead. And from there, I either might take a four-wheeler to another trail and then hike up, or I might go 6, 7, 10 miles in if I can find a place away from people to get that far in and hunt. And so for me, access is any way to get me from the city, from my house, to the public lands that I want to use.
So that's what it is for me as well. I think we have similar mindsets. It seems, though, that there's a large percentage of the population where access is more motorized access, right? When you talk about having access to public lands for hunting, it's about having a road that takes you right into the middle of it.
Yeah. And our office, we work with counties to define what areas we want to have motorized access and what areas of the state we want to have non-motorized access, or maybe we want to have limited motorized access with just a motorcycle or an OHV, off-highway vehicle. And so our office, we work with the local communities to determine what's best for the area, but we also work with the Forest Service to say, is it good to have a road here? Is this a place we should have a road?
We're trying to balance the needs of species, the needs of people,
different user groups, different
so
types
they can
of recreation.
Yeah, so they can have their own unique experience.
Yes.
In Utah, there's a significant need or push for that travel management planning because of some of the litigation that has occurred and the court coming down and requiring additional analysis. So they're kind of in a hotbed spot of trying to figure out that travel management.
Yeah, Utah is, we talked about monuments. It's a hot debate for monuments, but it's also a hot debate as far as what type of access do we need on our landscapes and what do we need to do to allow that access. For example, one of the lawsuits the state has filed is people call it the RS-2477 litigation. And RS-2477 is an old law from the late 1800s that allowed anybody in the public to create roads to get to a mining claim or to a homestead or to get to anywhere they wanted to use, basically.
It was a law that was meant to help settle the West.
It was. People realized
to facilitate the settlement of the West.
Yeah. If you want to have people in the West, they need to be able to get there, and they need to be able to put in infrastructure. And so, for 150 years, all of our Western states were putting in roads. People were out mining, were out hunting, were out using these public lands. Back to 1976 again, when FLPMA was passed, Congress said, okay, we're going to go away from this creating roads wherever. You can't just create a road now. We had NEPA, we had this environmental movement going on, and people said roads we need to look at them closer before we just put them in. And so we as a state of Utah, but Congress also said any existing roads or right-of-ways are not going away. Those are preserved.
Wasn't it also, though, it was 1976, but wasn't it also that you had to show use within 10 years of that date?
Yes.
There had been use within 10 years of that date?
10 years of public use.
Yeah.
So you couldn't just have...
Was it 10 years? Hang on, I want to make sure this... Was it 10 years of use, or was it that you had to show that there was some public use within the last 10 years? 10
continuous years. So it's based on the state law. So in Utah, 10 years of... our adverse possession laws.
Yeah, same as your adverse possession.
Yeah, 10 years of continuous
use.
Public use.
So it's not enough that it just says Jeep Trail on the map and then there's a dotted line. It has to have actually been used for that.
Well, it depends. It does, yeah. So there's two types of roads, just not a lot of detail here, but a little bit. We'll give it to because it helps. There's B roads. These are roads that the county has maintained. They've gone up with graders and spent money on these roads. Then we have what we call D roads. D roads are your Jeep trails. They're your 2 tracks that were being used maybe to get to a mining claim or to get to a homestead or a cabin up in the mountains. But they weren't being heavily maintained by the county. It was occasionally the county or a hunter or a grazer would go in there with a tractor and maybe maintain it a little bit, but it wasn't being constantly maintained. Whereas our B roads are maintained 2, 3, sometimes weekly. Some of them are paved gravel roads or paved roads. So these are routes that are out there.
So I'd heard arguments at one point that on some of these right-of-way roads, I'll just, for lack of a better term, right, that some that opposed being able to continue to use these are saying that some of these roads aren't really roads. They're cow paths. They're used by livestock. That they're not actually, there's no defined roads, or they might be a 2-track that's just faded, that's had very little use. Do you view those as valid counter arguments to some of the claims on some of these?
Well, part of it goes to the scope of what a road is. What? So.
Oh man, we're not going down.
We're not going to go down that rabbit hole. But I will just talk about. There are roads that I've driven on a lot of these RS-2477 roads. Part of my job is we go out and I'll meet with a rancher, or I'll meet with a miner or a hunter and say, "Were you on this road in 1960? What were you doing?" And they say, "I was hunting deer. I'd come out on this road every weekend with my dad and hunt deer." And I'll ask them, "How wide was that road?" When I was a kid, it was 12 feet wide. And I say, "How do you know it was 12 feet wide?" "Well, I could take my truck down there, a 2-wheel drive, big old 2-ton truck, our cattle truck that we had as well for our cattle operation, and we'd have still 3 or 4 feet on each side without touching the juniper trees." And then I ask, "Is it being maintained?" "Well, sometimes, that road by road, it depends. Some of these areas are smaller though. I've had guys say, "Well, this was a motorcycle trail. It was a cattle trail, but we used it every year. We'd take our horses and take our cows down that." And that's what this litigation is about, is we're going road by road, trying to figure out what kind of road was this for 10 years prior to 1976. If it was a cattle trail, that's what the road should be, a cattle trail. If it was a Jeep trail, that's kind of now gone smaller and smaller into a 4-wheeler trail because it's just people are using smaller vehicles, our right-of-way is still the Jeep trail. That's what Congress gave us back in 1976.
Now, the counties are claiming, about 36,000 miles of roads in this litigation? Is that about right?
That's about right,
Of the various types of roads?
Over 12,000 roads.
Yeah.
And some of these B roads, there's one in Fremont, Utah that I drive on, and I kind of laugh thinking, why is this why do we have to fight about this road? It's a paved road, houses on both sides, but because it goes between private and BLM, we have to determine that it's a county and state right-of-way, even though it's paved, even though, everyone down there believes it's just a county road, but on paper, it's still federally owned land.
So it's the argument is you're trying to protect local economy and access.
Oh, access for sure. I meet with some of these guys that have mining claims, or they're grazers or hunters. The hunters, there's guys. Utah, we're pretty good at road hunting in Utah. I'll give it that.
Yeah, you are.
What do you do in the middle of the day? It's hot. You're kind of sitting around going,
get an ice cream cone.
Yeah, what do we do in Utah?
Somehow I knew that about you. You talk this big game about being a backcountry hunter, and here you are telling me, you
get a frosty treat in Utah, and that means ice cream.
As long as I could, I'd like to road hunt.
You go down to the small town, Dave. I'll have to take you down to southern Utah, but it's middle of the day. You just go
Can we
down.
Go to Bears Ears?
We could go hunt. You got to draw the tag.
I think that area is coveted. I think that's
that's
hard
what I
place
understand. But every place in Utah is a hard place to draw now. That was one of the points I was trying to make before. It seems like you have. So I was in Utah last September, and I was talking to one of your wildlife, or several of your wildlife agency employees, and they were telling me about the way your elk season is constructed. Right, and I know a lot of states do it this way. We just don't. You put in correct me if I'm wrong, you put in for an archery elk tag. You apply for that. You draw an archery elk tag. Then that's your time to hunt. You can't hunt the rifle season. You have to make a decision. Am I going to hunt with the bow, or am I going to hunt with a rifle this year?
Yeah, if you draw a coveted, we're going to call them limited entry. There are trophy bull tags. You have to put in usually in February and March. We don't find out till end of May if we draw or not. So it's a long time waiting, anticipating.
Which is absurd, because now you just push a button on a computer and it populates the draw. It's like the NFL draft. They just want to build this thing up over weeks and months, and
it's Christmas.
Hype it, right?
It gives us. It's like I look forward to the time.
The lottery.
The lottery. Yeah, but I can see my credit card being hit for whatever the amount is. It's a great day.
Your hunt lasts for 3 days, and you spend the next 362 days planning for it and thinking
just
ahead.
like the rest of us.
Yeah. But for a draw tag, I know we got off the access for a second, but for the draw tags, you've got to put in sometimes 10, 15, 20 years for a trophy bull. And these are 350-inch bulls or bigger that you have a chance at.
Just a standard Wyoming bull is what you're saying.
Just a standard. But So once you draw an archery tag, you're stuck with an archery tag, or if you draw a rifle trophy tag. Now, Utah did try something, and then this is the first year they're doing it. I can buy an archery tag over the counter. Certain units in the state are what we call over the counter. Like Wyoming, I think most of the state of Wyoming is mostly over the counter. Utah's the opposite.
It's a mix. There's a good mix. There's a lot of over the for pronghorn. It's all draw. For deer and elk, it's a mix, and for everything else, it's sheep, goats,
it's all draw.
Moose, all draw.
But for your elk, you're looking at I can get an elk tag and go buy a archery over the counter elk tag now, and if I pay $150, which is the value of 3 elk tags, I can hunt archery, rifle, and muzzleloader.
See, if I spend $150, I just want to point that out. I will have the ability to hunt 3 elk in both the archery and the rifle season.
Hey, it's a tough issue. I definitely agree. There's, for access for elk hunting, I think Wyoming has a pretty sweet.
I want to talk about access for fishing in Utah before we have to wrap up for the night.
Before you go there, I just want to know, when you talked about this road access issue, how you guys, how has the governor's office wrapped their heads around that? And so you say you've got these counties that are saying 30 whatever, this a lot of roads. Does the state have a position? Does the governor have a position on kind of what it should look like?
No, we believe that they're state and county right-of-ways. That these roads are, because the law granted them as of 1976, they are our roads. However, we have to still prove, how long that road was, how wide that road was.
And that they're your road.
They're our road. We still have to prove the 10 years of use. So it's our claim. We just have to bring the evidence to assure that claim. Once we can prove it, it becomes our road. There's been a few cases decided already in Utah that have given the state and the county right-of-ways.
And that's, when you talk about having to prove it, that's why I want to transition into the other access I want to talk about with you, was to water. Because I think you have to prove it there too, but in a different way. Right? So I'm talking about stream access for anglers. Because, I come from a state where, we're here in Wyoming where the state of Wyoming owns the water, but the landowner owns the bed and the banks. So if I'm floating down the river, I can't drop an anchor. I can't get out and wade in the bed and banks unless I have to get around some kind of a structure, and for safety reasons have to navigate. But otherwise, I got to stay in my vessel as I'm floating down the river. I understand in Utah it's a little different. I understand in Utah that by constitution, not just the water, but the bed and the banks of navigable waters belong to the state of Utah. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, there's a recent case that came out of the Utah Supreme Court that said if a river was navigable, and the test that they used to define navigability was, did people float logs for commerce down that river? That's the test. And so
tie hacks.
Yes. So if you were floating logs down a river for commercial activity and purposes, that was navigable for commercial purposes. Therefore,
was that just the least amount of navigability? I mean,
there was other tests floated.
The baseline, because obviously, if you can float a kayak or canoe or a boat, that's a navigable waterway in Utah, right? So, but there was an argument by some that you couldn't on some waterways maybe you couldn't float a canoe.
Yeah.
Right.
No, there's definitely some.
But then the argument carried the day that you may not have been able to float a canoe, but it was a waterway that was used by tie hackers floating.
And so for folks who know tie hack, what that refers to is just people cutting down timber to use for railroad ties historically. So that's tie hack.
Yeah.
And so now you have this decision. What I thought was fascinating, that decision came out how many years ago? It wasn't that long ago.
Just last year.
Yeah. What I thought was fascinating about that is, after that decision came out, I was reading stories about people that were walking across private land to get to water to fish it, because they assumed that it meant, because the Supreme Court said because the Utah Supreme Court said that this was a navigable waterway, that the bed and banks were public access, that the water was public access for fishing purposes, that therefore that must mean they have the right to get there no matter what. I want to be clear and give you the opportunity to be clear. I don't think that's what the court said.
No. I think there's definitely been this debate. Well, if the river's navigable, that means I can just get to it any way I want. And the court didn't say
anywhere
that.
I want.
And anywhere I want. If I've got my neighbor and I want to walk across his land to get to the Weber River, I can walk across his land. And the court, that's not the holding at all. And so private property around on the edges of the river, the fields and the homesteads, those are still private. You cannot walk across them. You have to legally access the river at a point like a bridge crossing, for example.
If you get to a legal access point,
then you can
start walking up or down the bed and bank.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm assuming bed and bank means up to the high water mark, whatever the.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And at this point, the court has only limited this decision to the Weber River, and but the test will be applied to other rivers in the state to determine whether or not they're navigable. And so it's a small area of the Weber River. However, people can then come now and prove up and say, I think the Provo River, I think the Green River, and then I guess we'll find out which areas they can prove that a log was floated down for commerce.
But again, it's a matter of you have to be able to prove something that occurred potentially 120 years ago,
yeah, or more,
was occurring, and that's a pretty high burden to be able to show.
Now, you guys had a legislative effort to change that recently, didn't you? Wasn't there a big push on that?
A lot of this has all been tied to that legislative effort. There was some push to make sure that all the rivers in the state were navigable by some. And then our legislature pushed back and said, no, these are not navigable waters, and tried to stop people from walking across what the legislature believed was private property, just like Wyoming law. And the court kind of has gone back and forth, and finally this Weber River case kind of solidified what the test is and whether or not people can access these rivers.
So speaking on access, last thing I want to talk about on access. I want to talk about your cut slam. The Utah cut slam.
This is an issue.
We
have a cut slam here, by the way.
We do.
Oh, dude,
what's ours, Dave?
What's our cut slam?
Yeah.
Well, we've got the Bonneville, we've got the Snake, we've got the Yellowstone, and we've got the what am I forgetting? Colorado. Did I say Colorado? Colorado River Cutthroat. So we have those four. Yeah, we have a cut slam here. So cut slam, for people that don't know, is an attempt to catch each of the subspecies of cutthroat trout in that given state. And in Wyoming, you're given a certificate for it. In Utah, I think you actually get a coin, like
yes.
a challenge coin.
Yeah.
Right?
Pretty awesome.
So when I was in Utah last September,
Dave couldn't catch the cutthroat trout. Let's just get it out there, Dave, for the record.
No, I want to. So here's.
You want to get past that?
I want to get past that. No, I did catch cutthroat trout.
He has a grievance.
Here's my grievance. So I did catch cutthroat trout. I didn't complete the cut slam because I had to quit my day of fishing early. Actually, I fished all day. It was over 2 days, and I couldn't do the second day. So I caught my. Now I can't even remember which ones I caught.
Did you catch your? You probably caught your. I'm guessing your Bonneville cutthroat. You probably caught.
Yes, I did catch a Bonneville.
How about a Colorado? Did you get your Colorado?
I may have. Let's
hear your grievance. Let's hear the grievance.
Here's my grievance, and I want you to explain to me something. So in Utah, your cut slam has 4 cutthroats, right? So you have the Colorado cutthroat, right? You've got the Bonneville cutthroat.
That's correct.
You've got the Yellowstone River cutthroat. And then you have this made-up Bear River cutthroat. And that's what I want to get at, because every fish biologist I've ever talked to says the Bear River cutthroat is a Bonneville cutthroat trout. So
So Dave wants his coin.
So I want to know how in the world you came up with 4 distinct cutthroat when you really only. That's like here in Wyoming. If I said, okay, I'm going to go out and fish the Little Snake River, and because there are Colorado River cutthroat trout in the Little Snake River, I just caught myself a Little Snake River cutthroat trout instead of a Colorado River cutthroat trout.
David, I want to say that I know you struggled catching this fish.
I didn't struggle with catching it. Although I will say I struggled. In some ways I did, because the other thing I noticed is I couldn't catch one longer than my hand. And you
have little hands.
And I have little. we were fishing in tributaries up.
Box Elder County, I think.
I'm not going to give away locations, but we were fishing in small tributaries, and you're battling through willows, and I'm trying to fly fish, and it's impossible to fly fish in this it's like walking through a jungle to fish in a stream that's about 1.5 feet wide and 3 inches deep, and you're pulling out these massive cutthroat trout that are 4.5 inches long. So that's my second beef with you, is to catch a Colorado. It was a Bonneville. I think to catch your Bonneville trout there, you can't catch anything more than about 4 or 5 inches. But that I need an explanation. I need an explanation for why in the world you've decided to create this fourth subspecies of Colorado or of cutthroat trout.
Well, remember, I'm just a lawyer, so
which means you probably wrote the explanation for how they could get away with this.
I will say that they're a real species, and the only reason I can say that is it's on their website, and because it's on the internet, and because it's on the internet, it must be truth. It must be, just so people out there listening can know this. The Bear River cutthroat trout is native to the Bear River drainage, Bear Lake, and the Bear Lake tributaries in northern Utah. It is a species. We'll just put it at that. Just Dave can't catch them. So
this never ends. I just want you to know that.
So what you're reading between the lines, what I'm hearing is you wanted to have a cut slam, and your definition, like in baseball, you need to have 4.
I'm reading between the lines to figure there was some legislator that figured out we needed tourism in the Bear River area, and they said we're going to designate one subspecies of some sort of the Bear River cutthroat.
That area is an undiscovered gem.
I just want to be clear. I deserve my challenge coin. Because the Bear River cutthroat
just
doesn't
for this
count.
argument, he wants his coin.
Hey, Mike Fowlks, if you're listening, give David a call.
He may have been the one that took me out. Anyway, that's really I just wanted to touch on that and get your take on the Utah on the importance of the Utah Cut Slam program. Mm-hmm. And I'm willing to come back and give it another try.
Come back, David. We'll take you out, Dave. We'll catch a 6-incher for you. And
I understand that it's your Colorado River cutthroat trout get pretty big there.
They can get pretty big, yeah.
So I don't want to disparage all Utah fishing, but for those of you going after the cut slam, don't spend a ton of time on the Bonneville.
They can get big, but it takes some time
and bigger water. Yeah. Anyway, no, I had a great time doing it. I really did, and it was a beautiful area, and the access was great, and the fishing was phenomenal. I caught lots and lots of fish. Had a great time. I just had to find out if you had an explanation for why you created this fourth subspecies of trout.
Tourism. No. I do want to end here on back to the access and back to the hotbed of Utah and public lands. Every day I open the newspaper up, I get online, and we're always seeing this debate. How do we use our public lands? And I think it's a healthy debate. I think it could be healthier. I think we could have people at the table to talk about these lands. But Utah, some places we're going to have a lot of roads. That's just the reality. And in those areas that maybe we encourage people to go and recreate in those areas and use those roads. We're going to have other areas that we're going to push for wilderness. Hyannis, we're going to have wilderness there. The Lone Peak Wilderness area. We're going to have places we want to have solitude. We want to be able to get away. We want to make sure that all of our user groups can get to their mountains the way they'd like. Some places I want to get off on a horse and ride for miles. There are days that I don't have 2, 3, 4 days to hike in the backcountry, but I still want to go fish. I want to go try to catch that elusive Bear River cutthroat trout. And so come to Utah. You got to use the land to really understand it. Reading about these issues from afar, it's one thing, but it's the other to come out there, experience the land, and be a part of it.
So let me leave it with this. I want to ask you one last question. You've been talking about access, and at the beginning you talked about your experiences working with bighorn sheep. It's, you have a passion for the land. It comes across. You have a passion for the land. You have a passion for working on these issues. You're sitting here talking to us. You're on the Your Mountain podcast. We're talking about all these issues. What's your mountain? What's your mountain means something different to everybody, right? What's your mountain? What's your place?
My place is a big bull elk, bugling the aspens, charging in. I first spot him 150 yards away, giving some soft cow calls, watching him come through the aspen, and closing that distance to 30, 20, 10 yards, making an awesome shot. That's my mountain. And getting there... Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask if you could just write down the coordinates of your...
Yeah, you want that spot. And getting there, I've done it every way possible. I've hiked in a long ways with family and friends. I've driven to a spot where we've hiked off a ridge a few hundred yards from a road and killed a bull elk. It just depends. I love wilderness, but I also love those times when I can do a quick hunt and still get on a big bull elk close to a road. So that's my mountain. Diverse, multiple use.
Just like your career.
Just like my career.
Hey, I appreciate you spending the time with us, and I hope people listening recognize what a challenge your job is. How much is involved, how much work is involved, how much working with the public is involved, how challenging these issues are, and that Utah's got somebody that's really passionate about making this work for everybody. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Braden. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Mike here from the Your Mountain podcast. We need a favor. Go on our website, itsyourmountain.com, and find the links to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram so that you can like and follow us, and also so that you can share us with your friends. Wherever you got this podcast from, go ahead and click subscribe, rate us, and leave a comment. These simple things would really help us get the word out. That's itsyourmountain.com. Thanks for the help.